And I think we have an introduction, don't we, Julie? Is that right?
Yes, sir. We do have an introduction today. Just to confirm that we do have all of our board members here, with the exception of Danny. He did let me know that while he would try to attend, he might not be able to make it. We do have a forum. John Zinzarella is, I am very proud to introduce this gentleman as our new GRTC CFO. He joins us from, I was about to say Cincinnati, but it's Connecticut, two very different places. But he has a very broad background in both private sector finance as well as municipal government sector, about 30 years or so of experience, and his breadth of knowledge in finance as well as administration brings a valuable resource to our team. We're very excited that he started almost 2 weeks ago, almost 3 weeks ago. This is starting very shortly. He'll be here for 3 weeks. And I'm really comfortable that he is with us. I'm glad that he keeps returning each week when he actually officially moves with his wife. His wife is finishing up her job in Connecticut. When they've moved their household down here, I'll know we have him for good. So, we're gonna. He's in that honeymoon period and with us, and we know we love him already. John, if you would like to say a few words to introduce yourself.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Julie, for the introduction, and looking forward to helping make an impact at GRTC and getting to reach out to the members of the board as well as the other folks that are at the GRTC to help move the agenda that Julie has set forward.
Thank you, John. Thanks so much for coming and joining us. Julie brags on you a lot and says that you brought your abacus with you. We're very grateful for that. She says that you count well, and that but no, it's so wonderful for you to be here. Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.
I have a message here from Ian, who's having trouble getting on. He thinks he's got a problem in his own computer, and I don't know, Rob, if you can contact him or not, but might be a good idea.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Can we confirm that Mr. Coles is able to hear us and that he's able to participate? I see him online. Just want to make sure that he's here that we officially do have quorum.
Eldridge, are you alive over there? Yes, I see you.
Thank you, sir.
Can you hear us? Yeah, good. So we do have a quorum here. That's and we're ready to go with Carrie with public comments, I believe.
Good morning. Mr. Chair, we did receive public comment. For the benefit of all attendees today, I will briefly explain how to participate in public comment at board meetings. To protect the safety of meeting attendees, this meeting is being conducted through electronic communication means pursuant to and in compliance with City of Richmond Ordinance number 2020-093, adopted April 9th, 2020. Video and audio of board meetings are streamed live online and recorded for later viewing at GRTC's YouTube channel. Board meeting notices, agendas, and packets are available at GRTC's website, RideGRTC.com. Citizens are welcome to provide their comments in writing in advance to carrie.rosepace@ridegrtc.com. The person responsible for receiving comments in writing is Carrie Rose Pace, Director of Communications. All written comments received via email prior to 5 p.m. on the day preceding a meeting will be provided to all members of the board the night before the meeting and will be included in the minutes of the meeting. During the public comments portion of the agenda, Carrie Rose Pace will read all comments received by the submission deadline following the 2-minute speaking time limit normally observed in board meetings. This meeting, I received 2 submitted comments in writing to be read. From Rhonda Groves. I'm writing to you regarding the services that are provided by GRTC to senior citizens, in particular round trip. I wish for this to be discussed at your next board meeting on January 19th. I am the power of attorney for a senior citizen friend who does not have transportation and does not have the financial means to pay for Uber or Lyft to receive dialysis 3 times a week. He is over the threshold to receive Medicaid, which would pay for transportation by a small amount. When he was first told that he required dialysis, we used your caravan services. However, that did not go well, and he refused to use it after a few tries. The problem was he had to give them a pickup time, and it rarely occurs that dialysis was over at the time he predicted. Therefore, the caravan would arrive, not see him, and leave without trying to locate him or make sure he made it home safely. There were a couple of times that he was left outside the facility in his wheelchair with no one inside the facility they had left for the day, in the dark, in complete panic of how he would get home. Although the price was fantastic, it was completely too stressful. Consequently, he resorted to using Uber and or Lyft, which was costing him $300 a month. This forced him to go without necessary medications and enough food to sustain his renal diet. He had to rely on the kindness of neighbors and friends for these items, as he has no living relatives. On December 1st, 2020, he moved to a new location. This new location was more expensive than where he was living, but he was forced to leave and had no choice. We had to locate another avenue for transportation because his new monthly expenses, he was not going to be able to afford $300 in transportation costs. The dialysis center suggested GRTC because you had new programs in place. When I called and spoke to Ms. Angela Allah about the round trip service, it sounded perfect, especially since he could leave the pickup time open and call when he was ready. I feel this is why Caravan did not work for a dialysis patient. They do not know the exact time of when they will be ready to go home ahead of time. The cost for round trip was outstanding, so we decided to give GRTC another try. On the first day of him using round trip, he encountered a problem during the pickup from dialysis to go home for the day. After a little digging, we found that GRTC still had his old phone number in their database from when he used the Caravan service, even though we had updated them with his new cell phone number. This means he did not receive the text message showing him that the ride had been dispatched or the link that he could use to track his ride. Thankfully, the driver was able to locate him and get him home, but again, he was stressed out and panicked over this. I called and spoke to Angela again, and I thought we had fixed it again. However, it happened another time just a couple of days later. Mr. Chair, I acknowledge that this has now exceeded the 2-minute time, but I only have about 3 paragraphs left.
Go for it.
Very good. First, I would like to say that Angela Allah is extremely kind, friendly, and helpful. I know that this was not her fault. There obviously is something wrong with the database for it to revert to an old phone number. Something as simple as making sure the cell phone number remains in place is so very important, especially when it comes to our senior citizen community who have endured so much in their lifetimes, and some, like my friend, who have horrific medical conditions and limited funds, who rely on these wonderful programs, but they are only wonderful when they work properly. Secondly, despite the couple of hiccups with round trip, it has proved to be a beneficial program for my friend. It is going to allow him to live in his apartment and afford his medications, food, and perhaps even a special lunch out occasionally. How wonderful. We are so appreciative of this. He has also expressed to me that the drivers are very helpful in getting his rollator into the car, which is another great benefit. Thank you for allowing me to bring this issue of the phone number to your attention, because I want you all to understand and know that there is a problem, and hopefully this will now be corrected, not only for my friend, but for everyone that uses this service. I do not feel that my friend is the only person who has life challenges or has had the same problems that he has experienced with GRTC. All programs for senior citizens should be as easy and as stress-free as they can possibly be. If there's anything that I can do to assist you in any way, please do not hesitate to contact me. Best regards, Rhonda Groves.
Thank you, Carrie. That was a very interesting letter. I read it earlier, and Julie, I assume we've looked at the data issue, or will be looking at it, and I'm interested to learn about this change in the caravan availability for a round trip program. That's a good change.
And yes, Tim has, Mr. Barham has confirmed that he reached out to Round Trip, and that we have been told corrected. We will continue to watch to make sure that it stays in place.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair, we have one more public comment to read. From Chris Berry. First, I want to clarify the residents of Grove are not asking for the discontinuation of Route 77. As others have pointed out, allowing students to travel from U of R to VCU makes sense. In fact, it would probably make sense to extend it to downtown. However, we are complaining about the routing through the fan on Grove. In particular, the routing between Robinson and Harrison. Based on your own data, this serves almost no one, while it puts large buses going both ways on a residential street. Based on your data from November, we find the following usage. Eastbound, Grove and Meadow. For the month, a total of 21 on, 16 off. Given that there are 30 days in November, that amounts to less than one person a day for all the trips. Grove and Lombardy, 8 on, 18 off. That is less than half a person per day on about two-thirds of a person per day off. Westbound, Grove and Lombardy, 60 on, 5 off. About 2 people per day on, less than a sixth of a person off per day. Grove and Meadow, 7 on, 4 off. Again, about a sixth of a person per day. Note the above number of off on per day, not per trip. In other words, almost no one is using it. We continue to suggest a rerouting, either by shunting the buses at Robinson over to Cary, Maine, or over to Broad. This would accomplish several things. Give riders the opportunity to enter or exit on streets that have retail stores where they can shop. Allow for the removal of bus stops that are almost never used. See your own data, please. If you were to accompany this with an extension to downtown, it would allow students and others access to governmental offices, banks, hospitals, and retail without having to change buses. Thanks for your consideration, Chris Berry. Mr. Chair, this concludes the public comment for this meeting.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
We'll move to the minutes now if there's no comment on these. All right, so we need to have approval for the minutes of the last meeting, December 15th meeting of the board. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Can I have a motion? Move second, please.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that the minutes of the December 15th meeting be approved. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, they are approved. Thank you very much. And I think now we move on to reports, beginning with Ms. Torres, CVTA update.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Start my All right. I will be giving just some brief highlights on what's been happening in the month of January for CVTA. The CVTA TAC met on January 11th. In that meeting, we covered the Regional Public Transportation Plan updates, the Transit Governance Report, as well as began to discuss the topic of certification for projects for funding. In the Regional Public Transportation Plan, we went over, we had a meeting with the MPO Public Transportation Working Group that was held on January 5th. And this is with the consultant group, Jarrett Walker and Michael Baker and Associates, where we began to discuss the topics of the approach of developing the plan, the concept of ridership first coverage to discuss regional and local. And we'll get into that a little bit later as the consultants are here to give a presentation at the end of the meeting. And the Transit Governance Report, there was a smaller group of the CVTA TAC that met to discuss the 2 proposals that were submitted for the Transit Governance Report. And this committee was made up of GRTC, Chesterfield, Henrico, and the City of Richmond. That meeting was on January 8th. That group made a recommendation to the larger CVTA TAC, and we plan on moving forward and recommending this to the full authority, but the next meeting is not until January 29th for approval. The CVTA Finance Committee met at the beginning of the month on January 6th. Some of the topics that were discussed were the approval of transferring $80,000 that was already a line item, but it was under contracted services, and that was moved to reserve for contingency to go towards the Transit Governance Report. Other topics were the financial management policies and procedures, revenue transfer schedule, and then processes for review for payments and disbursement. Like I mentioned, the next meeting is January 29th for the larger group, and the CVA TAC's next meeting is February 8th, and February 10th is the Finance Committee meeting. Any questions? Like I
Right.
said, later in the board meeting, we'll be getting into a lot more about the actual public transportation regional plan.
Thank you. I've been watching a lot of these meetings, and we are well represented by Ms. Torres in all of these things. I'm sure you're very full of them. Let me recommend that you, to board members, that they attend or watch the main meeting of the CVTA on the 29th of January. It's on the YouTube channel for the TPO, and it'll tell you what the future governance structure of the region and CVTA is. It's worth watching. Thank you. Next is update on transfer center.
Yeah, let me just switch my screen. All right, next topic, permanent transfer center. We have been working with the city of Richmond in organizing a permanent transfer center ad hoc committee. So this group is made up of stakeholders within the region, actually, comprised of GRTC staff and board members, city of Richmond council members and staff, members of the housing community, representatives from the convention center also were involved, and various transit advocate groups. And many other organizations from the community. So we tried to get a good representation of not just the downtown area and city of Richmond, but others in the region. And so this group is serving as an advisory role to assist the city and GRTC first step in identifying a location for a permanent transfer facility. And then the next steps will be helping us determine a design that will be supported in the region and develop an outreach and engagement plan to kind of get us there. We did have the first meeting, and this was held November 19th, and we are in the process of setting up the second meeting. We're looking to have that set up for sometime in February and March. Kind of a parallel track going right now. The city of Richmond is the current public safety building that we are adjacent to downtown, is being planned in the near term for being sold and redeveloped. And that will have a major impact, of course, on GRTC operations because we are on 9th Street right there. So we are working with the city. We have already identified kind of our ideal location. We are hoping to be able to use that parking lot at 8th and Clay, which is very close to where we are now. So we are working through that process, and hopefully we'll know something in the near future, and we'll keep you guys engaged the more we know, and if we also need feedback and support through it, of course.
So that would be on 8th. We'd be using 8th rather than 9th at that point, huh?
It really depends on the design. It would be some sort of configuration. I think we would still have to use 9th and because of the one-way street
Going
setup.
north, yeah.
But we'd probably do some sort of access on Lee and then 8th Street, since it's kind of the one that's the most level. Just me looking at it, and I'm not an engineer, would be hopefully the access point that they would come up with. But we'll see as we work with a consultant to get that design.
Any questions?
If that is even the location.
Yeah, thank you, Adrian. Any questions on this? All right, thank you.
Sure.
So next, we have something from Carrie, certificates of appreciation to the community. Ms. Rose Pace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mhm.
During the COVID-19 emergency, members of the community have donated various items to GRTC to support our ongoing operations as we provide critical service to the public. From face masks to snack packs, these gestures are thoughtful and deeply appreciated by our staff. GRTC continues to receive donations, and we received several over the holidays. In November, we received 2 donations, both for operators. The first was from the Charmettes Incorporated, which is focused on the GRTC female operators. They prepared 132 gift bags. And then right at Thanksgiving, the Iota Phi Lambda Sorority Inc. Gamma Delta chapter prepared almost 300 Thanksgiving care packages for our bus operators. And then in December, when GRTC purchased more face shields, once again, Larkin Garby at the Good Work Society matched our purchase and donated 100 face shields to GRTC. The recommendation is that the Board of Directors authorizes the board chair and the CEO to sign certificates of appreciation, which say, GRTC is deeply grateful for your donations during COVID-19 to support our operations during this incredibly difficult time. Your thoughtfulness is sincerely appreciated. The certificates are in the executive office. They were printed and will be mailed and shared with the donors.
Thank you. What a good thing. Could I have a motion to approve this?
So moved.
And I heard a second from Mr. Coles, I think, right? So it's been moved and seconded that we send these notices of appreciation for these kind gifts. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It's been approved. Thank you very much. And thanks to the folks who did this. So now we're going to operations performance report. Mr. Barham.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I wanted to start to share my screen. Okay, and starting with the KPIs, to first talk about the on-time performance. It's pretty much been consistent. Hadn't really had any change for this past month as well. But the biggest thing I wanted to point out and note are the lost trips and the lost time rate by operators. Pretty much they go hand in hand. Except for that glitch you see in February of 2020. That was an issue that when we converted from HASTAS 2018.
Yeah, but I'm not seeing your screen. Are you sharing your screen?
The screen's not up?
Nope.
No.
Oops, I'm sorry.
Here it comes.
All right, you got it.
One of these days I'll get it right. So looking at the lost time rate, as I was saying earlier, there's usually a correlation between the lost time rate and the scheduled trips missed. Of course, you have to have operators to run the service. Except for, I was mentioning February, we had kind of a glitch there when we went from, I updated our scheduling software from HASTAS 2012 to 2018. There was operator absences that were carried over and almost doubled what was previously there on one or two of the operators, which kind of caused that spike. But otherwise, what you see is for this past month, is a significant drop in our scheduled trips operated. And like I said, primarily that's due to absenteeism. As you are aware, what happened after Thanksgiving and throughout the month of December, with the spike of COVID cases around the country, that also impacted us here at GRTC. So as a result of several cases of positive cases, as well as contact tracing scenarios, that resulted in a significant amount of lost service throughout the month. We'll continue to, as much service as we can, as best we can, utilizing operators with overtime and supervisors to make sure we make up the difference as much as we can. And I'll go over some of our hiring and recruiting efforts in a minute.
Mr. Barham and Julie, we discussed the possibility of at least putting a phone number on the stops so that if folks were left hanging there, they'd have some recourse to call for help.
Yes, we're still actively working on doing that. The staffing was short through the holidays. However, we're looking at the service schedule changes happening here very shortly, and we don't want to put it out before that happens. We want to do it with that change. So we're looking to do that towards the end of the month if it's still necessary once we make these service changes, adjustments.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Barham.
Okay, continue on. I've scrolled down to page 27 of the board packet. You see the service as far as the ridership goes, and it's pretty consistent from what we've seen the last several months. Ridership down compared to previous year at this time. So, so we've had, that steady ridership, not going too far down, but pretty much remaining consistent even through the month of December. What I will say about the KPIs in general, we are looking at a better way that we can be more analytical in our approach. So we are looking at how we can revamp and update the KPIs so that we can dive and to make sure that we are addressing and improving certain areas of the operation going forward. So there will be some more information at the next few months.
Thank you.
Specialized transportation, pretty much, like I said, similar pattern as fixed route, operating right around just under 92%. Complaints were holding steady, about the same as previous months, and same thing with accommodations. Staffing, we're at 265 full-time operators, part-time operators. We had 2 operators to graduate and go into revenue service on the 10th. Another operator graduated on the 17th. And the remaining 5 operators training will be graduating by the end of next week in time for our upcoming booking, which goes into effect January 31st. We still have continuing with active recruiting. We should have a class starting sometime around the 2nd week in February. We did have 3 operators to retire this next month, January 1st, and we have another one scheduled to retire February 1st. And on the maintenance side, same open positions as I previously reported, and actively pursuing and getting those filled as well. I think Julie mentioned in the beginning about some activity occurred yesterday around lobby day primarily. Fortunately, it wasn't as bad as it was, but it was enough to impact the service. What we do before any of these events, we stay in communication with the city and local law enforcement. A few of us met with law enforcement officials around the area last week in preparation for the event to make sure that we get updates and so forth as far as what to expect and how we can manage around it, detours and so forth. That's why when you see those detours come from Carrie and updated on our website, that's because we're in coordination with them to get that information ahead of time. Also, we're part of the city's emergency management system. So whenever the EOC is activated, we make sure we have representation there as well to make sure we get updated information and it's passed on to us here on site so that we can get that information disseminated out to the operators as quickly as possible in case we have to make changes to the service and so forth, which we had to do yesterday as well. As far as any COVID-19 and other issues, this is a part of my report that unfortunately I have to say, but it saddens me nonetheless. First, I want to offer my deepest sympathies on behalf of GRTC and condolences on the loss of one of our GRTC family members. The employee who worked in a non-public facing position passed due to complications of COVID-19 back on January the 9th. Out of the respect and wishes of the family, we're not releasing the name or any other information about the employee. What we will say is that the employee was valued, well-liked member of the organization who will be missed. Meanwhile, we're going to continue with our mandates as well as following the CDC guidelines, the state guidelines, and so forth. We have taken another round of testing. COVID testing took place last week, and we're also in talks with the health department on the distribution of the vaccine. You may have heard that transportation and other folks are included in this next round of vaccine distribution. So we want to make sure that we get as many of our folks tested who want to get tested as quickly as possible. And finally, on another note, also sad to report that we lost a transportation supervisor back on January the 15th. Anacita Gross, who had been with GRTC since 2015, succumbed to her bout with cancer She actually had cancer back in 2019, had went into remission, but it came back last year. Anna was a fighter, was a very dedicated employee who loved GRTC. She was one that made sure that, whatever her job was, she did it very professionally and very passionately. Just to give you an example, when the Pulse first started in 2018, she was the first supervisor assigned specifically in the radio room to oversee that service. She monitored diligently, made sure the spacing was done properly, used the tools that were afforded to her, and she actually updated our policies and procedures and developed some other practices that we're still using even today. So I just wanted to close by saying that, we miss her, we love her. I believe there are arrangements set up for her service here or at the funeral home later this week. And one of her wishes is for us to have a memorial service at the facility. So I know Julie and others are making plans for that down the road with their family. Unless there are any other questions, that concludes the operations report.
Well, thank you for your report. Are there any questions of Mr. Barham? And remembering these two people, one whose name I do not know, and that's important to the family, and Anna, whom Tim has talked about. I'm grateful for your work, and since I believe in the communion of saints, I believe you're hearing what I'm saying. And I will say it's impressive to be in an organization with 600 employees where this level of care for one another is exhibited. So it's a blessing. Mr. Carter, safety performance.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
I'll be going over the safety performance report for the month of December. Found on the board packages.
You're quiet there, Tony. Can you kick it up a little?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Working with the phone. As I stated, the board packages, the pages will be on page 29 and 30 of the board packages. Starting off with the external accidents, we had 32, which was an increase in 23% of last month, the month of November. Moving on to non-preventable accidents. And it's important to note that we did have an increase in non-preventable accidents, which, as you know, are no fault of the operator. We did see an increase in 21%. Then what we did is we looked at the type of accidents where we saw the biggest increase. One being damage to outside mirrors of the bus, which increased by 40%, and bus contact with fixed objects, which doubled. Staying in line with our agency's safety plan, what we're doing is we're taking a look at these actual accidents and reviewing the footage from them and doing of a causal analysis type approach, which means when we look at these accidents, we're trying to come up with contributing factors and what trends are actually taking place to see if there's anything that's, causing these accidents to take place. And we're really not finding anything so far as we were looking for location, type of bus, same type of operators, the same operators making the same mistakes. And the safety department and the training department worked with these operators and really found that there were no real trends that were continuing. So what we're doing is we're taking the approach of reminding the operators of what they're doing, reminding the operators of the safety techniques that they learned in training, as well as everyday safety techniques to keep everyone as safe as possible. We'll continue with the field observations, and we'll continue with the safety all calls, reminding operators through the radio to be as safe as possible, watch your surroundings. And hopefully what we'll do is we'll see an increase in the safety culture around GRTC, which will definitely decrease the number of accidents. And if there are no questions, that concludes the safety report.
Any questions, comments? Thank you very much for your diligent work and for your report. Ms. Torres, quarterly route performance. Can't hear you. Are you speaking?
Yes. All right. Well, you guys have seen this before. We introduced this last quarter. And we have already made it to the completion of quarter 2. And I am definitely going to zoom in for you guys here. And as we continue to work with this document, try and make it a little bit more visually easy to see as we add more quarters. It's going to get a little bit more complicated. So we'll try a new format next time, but bear with me through it this time. I know it's kind of little, especially on your personal computers at home. All right, so I'm just going to hit the highlights here, but not much has changed in the polls. A lot of this, Tim kind of hit the trends in his KPI report, but as far as ridership, it's about the same. We had about a 1% increase in the first quarter. Same with revenue hours. They also were about the same. For the next section, which is arterial, I'm just going to discuss the ones that are in yellow and red. So the yellow one is the Route 14. As far as ridership, it seems to be about flat, about the same. We'll continue to look at the passengers per hour as well as the passengers per trip. The Route 50 is actually a pretty drastic improvement from last time. It is still red, and as I talked about with last time with you, with Reverend Campbell, was, is this the right category for the Route 50? We're going to leave it in here for just another quarter and see how it continues to improve, but we did make that major change in September, where it is extended now from where it ended originally in Hermitage and now goes all the way to Broad and Second. So that's why you'll see such a drastic improvement in ridership, as well as an increase in the passengers per hour. But again, we'll continue to watch this and see if this is the right category for this particular route. The Route 1, I am going to highlight that up here. It looks a 345% change. Looks huge, but the reason was that it only operated for about 2 weeks in the first quarter. So now it's had a full quarter. So that's why it just shows such a high increase. And that's the change of the routes 1A, B, and C, where we now have on Sundays where those routes are split. The Route 1 goes from Chamberlain and Wilmer down to Southside Plaza, and then it makes the connection there. Next category, community radial. The 76 and the 77, those are also the two, in addition to the 50 that were changed in September. Both of those routes, the 76 and 77, we are continuing to watch them. And of course, Carrie already identified some public comments on the Route 77. So we have this one as a high priority for monitoring. We are doing a change coming at the end of the month where we are actually going to change the frequency from now it's 30 minutes to 40 minutes. So this will actually decrease a number of trips that are traveling on that particular route. And we will continue to monitor this over the next quarter. And if we do see even more trips need to be decreased, and if things at VCU as well as U of R don't change, then as far as the current purpose of the route, we will look at making changes if needed. I do want to highlight that we did look at some of the safety concerns that were brought up. We do not have any reports of any safety issues since the change in September for this route. So it seems to be a pretty safe route as far as incidences or accidents. All right, continuing down to the next section, circulator, feeder, connector. The one that always kind of stays in the yellow and red is the Route 93. And this route is just kind of based on design. It's to serve a senior as well as low income community. So we do tend to see this one being a little bit more expensive than others compared to the people who are actually using it.
Adrian, the on-time performance up in the first category of your main routes, running around 59, 63% up on the top list. Yeah. Is that, that seems pretty low to me.
It is very low. And we have been looking at them and monitoring. I mean, the overall system, if you look in the corner, is 66. Our goal for the system is 80, and for the Pulse is actually 90, since the reliability of dedicated lanes. Because of COVID, we were actually a little hesitant of changing a little bit of the running times, which is having a significant impact with things being either detoured or trips being cut, as well as we may change the express routes. So as far as the service, I feel like it's not in the structure to really make significant changes as far as things in the schedule. But if things are going to stay like this for a while, as far as just the way work setup is, then I think we will look into making some running time changes. We also are doing a separate initiative to look at more, I think, active management of some of these routes, which will also impact on-time performance. So just note that on-time performance isn't necessarily late. It also could be that there's less traffic than we designed the route to have in an, I guess, pre-COVID environment, and therefore a lot of the routes might be running a little bit early. So on-time performance impacts early and late.
So you'll keep us apprised of that. That really is not good. Yeah.
Yes, we will.
Yeah, okay.
The last category is just express routes, and we are still doing a combination of specialized transportation as well as fixed route vehicles for this service. I'm not going to really highlight anything in there. Any questions?
Thank you.
All right.
All right, so now we have Transportation Development Plan. This is special report, right?
Yeah, so this is just, let me pull up. All right, this is actually just an update, some more kind of just for your information of the annual update we're required to do for our transit development plan. So the plan itself was adopted by the board back in July 2018, and it'll exist, it's 6 years life in that, and then we'll have to redo a new one. So this is just our kind of our 2020 closure for the report, and then we update it for expanding it to the 10 years out. So now it goes a little bit further. So just some things that happened in 2020 for service improvements. Route 111 was a big one that we did. Is the route that was extended from Chesterfield County line, City of Richmond, down to John Tyler Community College on Route 1. And that was successfully launched on March 16th. And of course, it's service Monday through Saturday at 30 minutes. We had a few other things that we had planned in the 2020. However, because of COVID, they were split over to 2021. Again, the 50, the 77, the 76 changes, a small change to the Route 2B, where it now goes to serve Ladies Mile, so people don't have to walk as far in that particular community. There were some frequency changes on the 78, where they went down to 40 minutes to serve the Maymont community and the Randolph community. And then we also implemented the Route 1, which I went over all of those in the performance report. And I am not going to touch a lot of these because we have plenty of other presentations as far as things that are coming up over the next few years, 2022 and beyond. But included in the TDP update is service improvements that are proposed for the future, as well as capital projects. It also has our operating budget projections for the next 10 years. So there's no action necessarily required for this, but we will be submitting this to GRPT as required annually.
Thank you. Any questions? Nope. All right, so transit shelter installations and removal.
It's still me, okay. All right, just to give you a quick, I guess, recap as well as overview of what's coming project-wise before I lead into the actual procurement piece. We have planned out our FY21 shelter plan to get us through the end of the fiscal year. And the projects covered in here are our continuing Bon Secours East End, where we'll be installing 12 shelters. We have a shelter, at least one that will be going in the city of Richmond. That has been planned. We'll be removing 6 shelters in the city of Richmond. Henrico County will have 2 shelters installed, as well as Chesterfield County will have 4 on, that one's on the Route 111. And then we have planned, as we work through our capital process of identifying some shelter plans for FY22. So we'll plan those orders this summer, as well as get them in over the next fiscal year. But this City of Richmond, Chesterfield, Henrico County. We'll be continuing to do more shelters in FY22, and then we'll plan for FY23 after that. Just to show you what that looks like, this is what is planned for FY21. The purple ones are the Bon Secours shelters that will be going in very, very soon. The City of Richmond are the blue ones. Henrico County has the 2 red ones. And then there are the green that look a little bit similar to the blue on the southern portion of the map. And there are 4 of them, and those are the Chesterfield County shelters.
Adrian, could you send me that?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
believe it is also in your board report if you look after the action item.
Is
Well, we
it?
can send it to you electronically
If
as
it's
well.
there, that's fine. No, I got it. All right. Well, yes, that's fine. I got it. So the ones for 22, have they been determined yet, or is that another 12 Bon Secours? What is that? Are they paying for that?
No, we actually have a running list of everything in our system that would be eligible for a shelter. So we have that list, but then we also meet with the city to kind of prioritize that and any others that they may be aware of that are kind of special needs. We also go through that per fiscal year as we do our capital application. So this is 12 that we identified so far, and it's still a little bit premature because we'll do our site visits and really determine if the site can even hold a shelter. And once that's determined, then we'll get the list finalized over the next few months. Same thing with Henrico County. We have a list with them of things that are priority as well as things that kind of could qualify within a little bit different criteria. So
But Bon Secours gave us a grant, which is paying out in FY 2021, right?
Right. There are 2 on there that you'll see that are purple. The City of Richmond is doing a 9-mile improvement project where they're doing shared use, sidewalk, and bike ped path. So those 2 shelters have to be held off until FY22 because we don't want to install them and then they rip them back up. Those 2 are being held off until FY22.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions on that? Do you need some action on that?
One moment, let me actually
I think
switch
you do.
to my procurement piece.
We have to authorize the CEO to execute a contract with Commonwealth Construction Company for removal and installation.
Yes, so we did an RFQ, so request for qualifications, and we actually got 3 bids back. And we went through, we had a committee that went through and scored them. The 3 were Commonwealth Construction, Machinery Movers, and Jeffrey Stack. And after that review, as far as the qualifications, as well as looking at the kind of per unit cost, there was kind of a range from installation from $25.50 with Commonwealth to $76.25 with Jeffrey Stack. We decided to move forward with Commonwealth Construction as our installers. And the way that this is going to work is we're going to set it up per project. So we'll review within the scope of each project and actually have a PO per project. And we are asking the board with this that GRTC recommends the Board of Directors authorizes the CEO to execute a contract with Commonwealth Construction for removal and installation of transit shelter, as well as amenities for an initial term of 1 year with 2-year, 1-year renewal options with an annual not to exceed value of $500,000. So that's per year, and then a not to exceed total contract value of 3-year terms of $1.5 million. And we will come to you guys every year as we do our capital budget to see the exact amount that we plan on doing.
And the money for this comes basically from specific grants or payments from localities and others?
Yeah, it's a mixture, for example, for FY22 as well as applying for 22. This one is a mixture of the operating grant we got from Bon Secours, our 5307 grants that we get, as well as the matches from the localities.
Okay, thank you. Any questions on this? That's excellent work. Could I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? Second. It's been moved and seconded that we approve this, we authorize the CEO to execute a contract with Commonwealth Construction Company of Virginia as detailed already. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. It's passed. So next we have GRTC Fleet Cleaning and Disinfecting Services. Ms. Thompson.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. At our December board meeting, staff requested that the board ratify a contract amendment to original building services for fleet cleaning and disinfecting, giving us time to complete a procurement for these services. Since then, we received 20 proposals in response to a November 4th, 2020 request for proposal posting. The proposals received ranged from $80,000 to $1.3 million annually, and from $419,000 to $6.4 million over a 5-year period. After obtaining references from the top 5 proposers, the evaluation committee determined that Happy People Services is the highest ranked proposer. This decision was ultimately based on their technical approach, fleet cleaning experience, and the overall value reflected in their pricing. Staff's independent cost estimate was $750,000. Negotiations with Happy People resulted in a firm fixed price of $352,800 annually, with a not to exceed total contract value of $1.764 million over a 5-year period. Services will include sufficient labor, 7 days per week, to disinfect and sanitize GRTC's entire fleet daily. This service is an operating expense included in the approved FY21 budget and the FY22 draft. CARES grant funding is currently used to offset this cost. Staff's recommendation is that the Board of Directors authorizes the CEO to execute a 1-year contract with 4 one-year options with Happy People Services for GRTC fleet and paratransit cleaning and disinfecting services for a not to exceed annual total of $352,800 and a total contract value not to exceed $1.764 million.
Thank you for that report. Are there any questions about that? Could I have a motion to approve this request that the CEO execute a contract with, and I quote, Happy People Services, end quote. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second, please.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the CEO execute a contract with Happy People Services. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you, Ms. Thompson. All right, financial report.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ms. Bailey.
All right. Starting on page 44, all payables over 30 days were paid on December 3rd. Below that, you will see the majority of the aged receivables over 30 days has been collected. Henrico and Chesterfield's AR on the books at November 30th have also been collected in full. We also received Bon Secours Pulse sponsorship payment of $212,500, which makes up the balance of the 91 day. On page 44 and 46, page 45 and 46, I would like to share a few comments on the variance. The favorable variances for the month of November under total expenses offset the October unfavorable variances due to the fiscal year 21 budget allocating 3 pay periods in the month of November, when the actual 3 pay period month was October. This has no full year impact as it is a timing variance between the months of October and November. Looking forward, this will occur again between the months of April and May. This again is due to the budget allocation. A quick note regarding the unfavorable variance on the planning, scheduling, and marketing line. This was due to $130,000 being expensed during the month of November for the operator recruitment ads, which ran on digital and TV. scrolling on down. Overall, we continue to track 1.5 million favorable to budget due to the less than anticipated use of our SpecTran service. Unless there are any other questions, this concludes my presentation on the financial report.
Questions and comments on the financial report? Thank you very much, Ms. Bailey.
You're welcome.
Tanya, I think we've got you again here, right? Or we got cash flow still?
Yes.
We've done that.
All right, let me share my screen again. Okay. The cash flow projection can be found on page. I'm not sharing.
Yeah, you're
No,
not
sir. No,
shared
ma'am.
here.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
There we go. Got to click that share button. All right. The cash flow projection can be found on page 50. And as of December 31st, the contingency fund reserve advances have been returned. So we were able to return the 2.5 million during December. Forecasted January 2021 month-end position is predicated upon receipt of Richmond's third quarter funding payment, which to date has not been received. In addition, we received our first of our 6 increased state operating assistant payments in the amount of 1.1 million on January 11th. Unless there are any other questions, this concludes my presentation on the cash flow.
If I can add in here, Dawn, I believe that if we do not receive the input from Richmond prior to the beginning of November, that we might need to use the contingency fund again to make sure that we make payroll, but that it would be immediately replaced with the payment from Richmond. Is that correct?
That's correct.
When should this happen, you say?
This month.
Okay, January.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
okay. All righty. Any questions on the cash flow? Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Recent and upcoming procurements, Ms. Thompson.
Okay, I've only added one procurement to the current and ongoing procurements list, and that is for corporate medical services. And this service will be used if necessary, if we need a physician to help us determine an employee's fitness for duty.
This is a new thing that we've decided we need.
This is something we're exploring.
If I might elaborate on that, Mr. Campbell, the need for that comes basically from our union contract, which we have discussed repeatedly. We have issues with some levels of absenteeism issues and unexcused absences and no-shows, as well as long-term leaves of absences. Per the contract, which is pretty standard for many contracts across the country, if there's any question, we are allowed to send an employee to a physician that is a GRTC approved physician for verification of illness and for verification of those benefits. Without having a doctor who is on call as for the agency, we handcuff ourselves in not being able to implement those terms. The union has asked that we do start using those and taking on our own obligations to enforce the absenteeism issues, and this contract would allow us to do that.
All right. Any questions about that? Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Regional Transportation Plan, Scutterwag, Adrian Torres.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Adrian, you're on mute, I think.
I am. Hello again. I am actually going to introduce Scutterwag. He is with Jarrett Walker and Associates, and he is going to do a presentation very similar to what was done at the Public Transportation Working Group with the MPO to the board to keep you guys very engaged in this whole process. So, hand it over to Scudder.
Thank you, Adrian. And good morning, everyone. Pleasure to be with you today. I think most of you are probably familiar with me. We've spoken a number of times in the past in our previous work on the city's transit network plan and on the transit development plan for GRTC. And we're pleased to be back to help you all with this regional public transportation plan. So today we just want to give you an update about where we are in the process and where we're headed. So we've started off kind of with three big questions that we've been talking with the public transportation working group from the region, the representatives from TPO about how much can we, how big is the pie? How much additional service might you be able to afford with the new funding stream, but also with the cutback in local funding, and what is possible over the next few years? Then where should that money potentially go, at least at a high level, and how should it be distributed? So starting with the first of those, how big is this pie potentially? So working with GRTC staff, working with Adrian, working with the financial staff at Michael Baker International, who is on board to help us do some financial forecasting. We've sketched out a scenario through FY24 of what your fiscal situation at a high level would look like. If nothing changed, if you ran just the service you had today, if revenues grow modestly in the range of 2 to 3% per year with some slight adjustments to the CVTA forecasted funding, because the current forecasts from the state we think are a little bit rosy. And if costs rise about at 4.8% per year, which is about on trend line for the last few years. This table gives you the kind of big picture of what does that look like in the revenue and expenses on an annual basis, and what's the difference. And the big thing you'll notice is that there's a large surplus in FY 2021 that is in large part because of CARES Act funding, and because the CVTA funding is coming in the door in a way, but it is not being spent yet. So it's effectively kind of filling up in a bucket of a surplus. And you don't actually have direct access to those funds yet, and really, at least not in large part. So looking to the future fiscal years, no CARES Act funding in the future. Local funding has been cut back in response to the CVTA legislation. So that surplus goes down in the future years, and it declines in size from about 8 million to 6 million over time as revenues are growing slower than costs over that time period. So that's the big picture. Now, what could you do over the next couple fiscal years? At a high level, you have this large surplus from 2021. What if you used that as part of a program of trying to expand service in the next few years? If we set aside some dollars for a capital and operating reserve, approximately $3 million a year, then you would have between $3 to $4 million over the next couple of fiscal years that you could use for expansion. We're saying roughly 88% of that could actually be used for expanding fixed route service, because some of that has to be set aside to pay for paratransit. Currently about 12% of all your expenses go to paratransit. So we're using that 88-12 split to ensure we're not going to expand without having the dollars to provide the federally required paratransit service you would have to spend. You could then spend down the FY 2021 surplus over the next few fiscal years to fund about $10 to $11 million in expanded fixed route service over that time period. And what would that mean in terms of just revenue hours of fixed route service? What you could do with that would be about 93,000 additional revenue hours of service over what's planned for FY 2022, which is about 18% more than today. And to just give you some context for how much is that? What does that actually get you? Route 19, which runs from Willow Lawn to Short Pump today, is about 22,000 revenue hours of service. The Pulse BRT today is about 54,000 revenue hours of service. So it just kind of gives you some sense of what does that actually mean in terms of fixed route that you run today. The key thing about these assumptions is that, of course, you're spending a surplus that's a one-time thing, and you're spending it over a couple of years. To maintain all of the services beyond in FY 2025 or beyond would mean that local partners would need to provide additional funding after you've spent that surplus, or fares would have to increase, or some other combination in order to maintain all of that service. It would also mean that none of this FY 2021 surplus could go to other capital priorities. If new funding were to come to the table from any local partners or anyone else before FY 2025, under this scenario, then you could reallocate some of that surplus to capital priorities, for example, or to a reserve for the for the long term. So that's the big picture of kind of how big is the pie overall. And just want to pause for a moment to make sure there aren't any questions on this kind of big picture scenario.
Going back to the previous slide, you have a capital reserve, an operating reserve of almost 3 million each year. So that's a total of $9 million being used for that.
Well, it's the intention there is, number one, to ensure that there's an annual reserve on your operating basis each year in case there are any, in case there's a bad year, in case there's, some cut in funding from a local partner for any reason, or if there's some loss of revenue from some other place. Like, we're assuming in this scenario right now that, fair revenue is growing about 2 to 3% per year. If that were not to grow as quickly, there's a reserve there.
But that's a new amount of money, right? So the total is, if it's a reserve and it's not expended, it would be carried over, wouldn't it?
It would potentially be carried over if you didn't spend it. The other thing, of course, is that if you are going to expand service, you need more capital funding to buy vehicles. And so some of this is also there to support the capital program of expanded vehicle acquisition, shelters, all the, putting out new bus stops and all of those items. So it's a reserve for some of those things as well.
Yeah, I have a real question about that. Our capital money comes from other sources than this.
Well, you do have capital sources, federal, state, and others, but
Right.
you always have a match as well. In most cases, that you have to provide at least some local match for most of those.
4%.
Yep.
If I can add in
Sometimes more.
also, Scudder and Chairman Campbell, this is meant to give a high-level overview of what we could do with the money. Part of the discussion we've had at the regional level about the CVTA money is that by having that money available not only for transit operations, but also to be able to provide a certain amount of money that we could leverage for higher levels of grants. On the highway side, we forego a significant amount of federal and state match money because we don't have that local match available to us. This isn't saying that we would do this. This is just saying this is one scenario, one lever that we should consider as we allocate where our funding goes or doesn't go. If all the money goes into operations, we would forgo the match capital for North-South BRT or for a major transfer center downtown, that this money could help us leverage for regional increases in our infrastructure.
Do you include in the assumed revenues the required increase in local contribution because of the maintenance of effort regulation from the state?
So the baseline assumption is that the local funding would increase at approximately 3% per year, which is actually probably higher than the minimum required by the legislation.
Thank you.
So we've made some pretty conservative assumptions, I'd say, on the expenses side, some pretty modest assumptions on the revenue side. So this is a somewhat conservative scenario so that we're not over-promising what you can deliver over the next couple of years.
Thank you.
So the next question is, what kind of service? What kind of service should be regionally fundable? So at a high level, we talked with the working group about a couple of key policy questions about what you should be able to do with the new regional money. Should it be able to pay for any transit service anywhere? Should it be available only for transit services that meet some sort of standard of regional usefulness, meaning perhaps connecting across jurisdictions or connecting major activity centers or major regional corridors? We understand that GRTC staff and some on the board have expressed a strong desire that there be some threshold. About half of the working group members, actually 50% of them, when we polled them, said that they agreed that we should have some minimum threshold of regional usefulness, so to speak. Only one disagreed with us when we said we should have that, and most of the others weren't quite sure. They really kind of want to see how our alternatives process plays out before deciding that. So we think we will move forward with some rules that we'll refine as we go through the planning process. the next big question is just thinking about what's a fair way to distribute this regional pie. This gets to the question of how should, this new regional funding pot be distributed. And it's important at a high level. I just want to go through what we talked about with the working group. You all are probably familiar with a lot of this thinking, but thinking about this from the high level, distributing transit service isn't like distributing parks. It's not really like distributing schools, because generally those kinds of services, those sorts of infrastructure, really benefit primarily the areas around them. But transit's really not like that. Transit is a thing when a transit line is going from X to Y, it is benefiting both X and Y. So it's not, really accurate to say that a service in area X is just for area X, because it is for both X and Y. So we think about that in terms of routes that go from Richmond to Henrico. It's not really accurate to say that that route is for Richmond or for Henrico. It is for really the whole region. It is for both, and maybe even beyond both, depending on how it's designed. So the other really big question is, does ridership matter? Because in many regions, when we start talking about how you divide up a pie, it seems fair to start thinking about, should you just divide everything up by where the taxes came from, by the population or population and jobs? But the challenge is that transit demand really scales very strongly to density and that if you were to distribute a pie based solely on population or solely on population plus jobs, you would divide that pie and put service out into places where you would not get much ridership, which really raises the question of whether ridership is your goal. And what is high ridership transit? It's basically frequent service in places that are dense, walkable, linear, and proximate. And I think we've talked with you all before about that basic ridership recipe. You've heard us, say this before, but you double the density, you often more than double the potential ridership, because not only do you have double the potential number of riders around each stop, but we know empirically that at double the density, people are more than twice as likely to ride transit, because destinations are closer together. There are more potential riders, and there's usually a scarcity of street space for parking. There's usually a scarcity of street space for driving. And so we know high ridership is extraordinarily tied to higher density at a non-linear way. Walkability is also critically important. You've got to be able to walk to a stop, which means the well-connected pre-World War II developed fabric of the region is the area where you will naturally get significantly higher ridership than you would in the less dense, less well-connected parts of the region. Linearity is critical. If you have to turn off of the main roads to get to office parks that are half a mile back in an office, by the freeway, off the main road, if you have to go through large parking lots in order to get to retail destinations, you're naturally going to cost you more, and people feel like they're constantly going out of their way to get places. And then proximity. If you have to traverse really long gaps between significant dense centers, that means it costs you a lot more to run the service, and people are less likely to ride. And this creates significant challenges where you have dense places, with large gaps in between. And I would point out this is a challenge for, say, reaching Ashland. Ashland has good, fairly dense fabric, but it is so far from so many other dense places in the region, it would cost you a lot to serve them with a significantly useful service relative to other destinations that are much closer to the core of the region. And so that gets back to the basic ridership coverage trade-off that we've talked with you all before. In a ridership maximizing system, you would focus on where that ridership potential is the highest, where places are dense and walkable, which would also get you the most reduction in vehicle miles traveled if you put service in those places at frequent levels. But the other side of the equation is many people will understandably argue for we should spread this service out to provide some basic access for as many people as possible with it. And if we're talking about what would a maximum ridership network look like with regional dollars, it's going to go on the long, straight corridors with many people and destinations. You think of Broad Street, you think of Midlothian Turnpike, you think of maybe Mechanicsville Turnpike, you think of some of these big major regional corridors, and it's really going to be focused in the three core jurisdictions, Richmond, Henrico, Chesterfield. And it would mean a lot of regionally focused ridership oriented service in Richmond, not because of any political reason, but fundamentally because Richmond's development pattern is so favorable to ridership. A ridership maximizing regional network is one that wouldn't focus much on rural areas, on small distant towns, on single family car oriented places, and it's not going to focus much on industrial parks, just because that's not where you get high ridership. So we talked with this basic question with the public transportation working group about thinking about the CVTA funding portion as one of the pies of funding that you all have, and thinking about it in terms of that pie, how much should be going to ridership maximizing service and how much should be going to coverage service. And that is a policy question about how to spend that portion of your pie, and where should the line be between those two portions of that pie, with an important caveat that if we're going to have a minimum sort of regionally useful standard, even coverage oriented service that's spent out of that CVTA pie should be spent in something that is still regionally significant. So a regionally oriented coverage service, if CVTA, if the working groups say we should have some portion of that money go to coverage oriented service, still should be something that has either connecting across jurisdictions or connecting major activity centers, or in some other way is still regionally useful coverage oriented service. So you can think about this in terms of in the context of regional service, it would make a lot of sense to serve Broad Street in Henrico. It would make a lot of sense to serve Brook Road in Henrico in a regionally oriented network, because those routes are going to connect to the radial corridors going into and out of the core. A regionally focused pot of money wouldn't really consider, say, Parham as a high ridership thing to do in the context of the whole region. Even if it is, a corridor that probably would get high ridership relative to everything else in Henrico. So that's a way to think about how you might consider what is regionally oriented coverage service. So just to think about how at a high level, these formulas might work. If we were to say that some portion of the CVTA budget should go to coverage, we would then say, okay, 20%, 30%, whatever percent that is in coverage would then get divided up amongst every jurisdiction by the population plus jobs. So every jurisdiction would get these blue bars of service hours relative to their population. And of course, that's still going to put more service in Henrico or Richmond or Chesterfield because they have more people, but it would distribute service hours to outer jurisdictions as well. The ridership maximizing portion of the budget is really only going to put service in probably those three core jurisdictions, because that's where ridership maximizing potential is in the region. So that policy question we put before the steering committee about, or the working group, almost all of them agreed that we should think about this CVTA pie in terms of how much should be ridership oriented and how much should be coverage oriented. And so we are going forward in the next round with looking at where would different breakdowns in this pie lead us in alternatives. So just lastly, a couple of things. How do you divide up the pie of total revenue hours that you have? If we think about the different pieces of the pie, there's the CVTA funding that contributes to your service. There's local jurisdiction funding that contributes to your service. And then there's federal, state, and fair funding that contributes to your service. All of those things, basically, that accounts for 98% roughly of your total contributions, your revenues. So if we were to distribute the revenue hours that you can afford out of those forecasts by each of these pieces of that pie, we would put 39% into a federal, state, and fairs portion, which, based on talking with the working group, they would agree that because those sources of funds are things that rely on relatively high ridership to maintain and grow those funding sources, that should be a ridership maximizing bucket of funding. CVTA is about 42% of contributions in the future, which would then get distributed based on that red versus blue pie, the ridership versus coverage policy that we would show you some alternatives on in the next phase and get your input on what the ultimate decision should be about how much should be coverage and how much should be ridership. And then each jurisdiction that is putting money in would get a distribution based on its portion of the contribution. So City of Richmond in the forecast is putting in 12% of contribution, which out of the 600 and some odd thousand revenue hours that your entire pie buys would get 73,000 revenue hours that they would get to direct in consultation with GRTC how that service works and where it goes. And Henrico 4%, Chesterfield 2%. The asterisks here I would point out are important. They Henrico and Richmond both have historically requested and paid for expanded paratransit service, the CARES Plus program, which goes above and beyond the federal requirements for paratransit. And so the contributions they're providing are reduced by the amount that has to pay for the CARES Plus program before they're getting counted in the contributions for the entire program of services. That accounts for about 1.5 million of Henrico's costs, roughly, based on the amount of service provided to CARES Plus versus CARES trips in the past. So that's an important caveat about how much contribution is coming from each.
And the city's Care Plus add-on is how much?
It's not much. It's about $150,000.
Okay.
Because most of the city is within the federally required area, a 3/4 mile.
Right. Thank you.
So our next steps, we have refined these financial protections pretty well in consultation with GRTC. We will potentially make any final updates based on any local input we get over the next week in our core design retreat, but we're sitting down starting this afternoon and working with that public transportation working group from the TPO to draw 2 alternatives of what a network could look like given different assumptions about the ridership and coverage balance with the CVTA bucket of funding. So we'll design those 2, and then those 2 will come back to you, to the working group, to the public and stakeholders as an indication of, what would it mean to make different policy choices on that question. And that will be then the input we get back from you will then define how we draw a recommended network. So that's all I've got. Happy to take.
Very helpful. Questions of Scudder or Adrian on this?
I do have one, Ben. Real quick, I was thinking, Scudder, traditionally the need for regional trips has focused on commuting from home to work. How has the impacts of COVID-19 and the reduction in commuter miles impacted what our forecast will look like and how we can best plan for regional transit if commuter miles don't come back to the pre-COVID levels?
Well, so there's a long answer and a short answer to your question, or a short-term and long-term answer to your question, really. The short-term answer is we know work from home has increased dramatically amongst office workers. And we know that even after COVID, there's likely to be a higher percentage of people working from home or with more flexible opportunities. So we know commute to office is likely to be a market that comes back more slowly for transit, no matter what. But even absent that, we've always known that peak period office commute type service, park and ride type service, is actually relatively unproductive service for transit because for 2 reasons. One is it's obviously very peak oriented. So you're putting out service just for a couple hours a day. You have a lot of extra deadhead of your drivers going back and forth to the garage. And it's also very one-way oriented. So you're running buses empty in the opposite direction quite often to serve that market. So that market is a less, even in normal times, it is a less efficient market for you to serve than the all-day transit markets that you serve going up and down major commercial corridors like Midlothian, like Broad, like Brook Road, and serving the trips of people moving around all day for service workers, retail workers, people going to medical appointments, as well as people going to the office when possible. So big picture is, the commute to office market, the park and ride commute is not something we see as a highly efficient market. It is something that in most cases, if you wanted to serve it, we would consider that more of a coverage service, except for a few, perhaps key markets. I mean, the one that you're doing particularly well out in the past, the Gaskins 29X and the 82X are about the only significantly productive express services you're running today. So big picture is it's just not the highest ridership thing to do relative to lots of other things you can do.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Scudder.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, George. Go ahead, George.
Okay, can you go back to slide 24? I believe it was slide 24. Okay, just ballparking those revenue hours, those projected revenue hours for the city of Richmond. How, what kind of delta do we have with this projection versus where we are? I wouldn't say today, but maybe pre-COVID.
So an important thing to note here is when we're talking about the numbers in these three rows about how much each jurisdiction gets, those are effectively the revenue hours that each jurisdiction would have a significant amount of control over. These two numbers, the 239,000 and the 256,000 numbers, are things that would go to basically building a relatively high frequency regional network, a lot of which would probably be in Richmond, would also be on the major corridors in Henrico and somewhat in Chesterfield. So a lot of this portion of
city of Richmond, okay.
It would still likely fall in the city of Richmond, more so. The more of the CVTA part of the pie that people say they want for ridership purposes, the more of this would go into those major regional corridors, a lot of which come into and out of the city.
So previously, we just haven't looked at it. We haven't sliced it this way.
Exactly. I mean, ultimately, this whole regional pot really completely changes how you think about the whole pie that you're splitting.
Okay. All right.
But currently, the ridership, currently the Richmond revenue hours is what around 430?
I mean, the amount of service in the city of Richmond is, around 400 to 420,000 revenue hours, roughly, something in that range. I'd have to go back and double check, but around that.
I just wanted that on the record. And Julie, you're not ascending on us right now because I see the light again.
I know. I'm trying to get.
You deserve it, but you can't go yet. I just want to let you know.
Thank you. I appreciate both those sentiments.
Hey, Scudder. This is Gary Armstrong. I'm really curious about the potential to add in an economic development factor into how you think about expansion. It's obviously transit. It's a little bit of a chicken and the egg sometimes in terms of density and where it's located. Sometimes transit or transportation routes can drive density and meaning economic development. Is there any way to factor that into how you guys look, or is that a secondary kind of thing that you consider?
Ultimately, I'd say it's more of a secondary thing that we consider because, I'd say it's generally a secondary thing we consider because you have so much potential transit demand that's underserved today in so many corridors that you could spend all of your budget very quickly on, just trying to serve reasonably well what you've got on the ground, as opposed to expanding to new areas that aren't developed today. I would say there is a very valuable tool and process of the coordination of transit and land use planning for economic development purposes, like has been done with the Pulse Corridor Plan, and is being done in the Richmond 300 process, where you've got frequent service on the ground in a number of corridors already in the city, and we may be able to expand or improve frequent service potentially with this expansion in some corridors. And long term, you as an agency have a strong interest in seeing the city, Henrico and Chesterfield, further improve the density, walkability of those corridors. That's where I would say you get the best bang for your buck in economic development terms for the localities and for GRTC and for everyone long term.
Mhm. So Gary, that's a really good thing to ask, because the business of transit preceding development is a very critical thing for the region and transit in the long run. Scudder and Adrian, part of what we need here is not simply what we can afford within the relatively small amount of money available, but we need a sense of what could be done if we had more money on a regular basis, because there will be public advocacy around this, and the relatively small amount of money that we're being left with in the CVTA should not be the limit of our vision as we go forward. Scudder, this is excellent. Are there other questions about this? What percentage of the CVTA revenue, of the CVTA 15% per year, is represented by the money we're being able to take out here? It sounds to me like we're spending more than 50% of the money that is coming to us from CVTA on just making up for what's not been paid for by the localities, and what will be sucked up by the increased costs.
I think some of it depends on how much your costs grow over time, and ultimately, if we go back and we think about this in terms of this projection, if you look at FY22, FY23, for example, the surplus is $7 to $8 million. The CVTA incoming in those years is 27 to 28 million, roughly. So if you think about it just in those relatively simple terms, the surplus, the money going to effectively backfill is about 20 million of that each of those years.
So more than 2/3, close to 70% of the new CVTA money is being eaten up on backfill.
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's important. That is not the intention of the legislation, or certainly the sponsors of the legislation. Can I get a copy of this, Scudder?
Absolutely. Mr. Campbell, this will be posted to our website and it will be distributed to everyone after the meeting.
Thank you. This is excellent. Other questions? And you guys are having a retreat next week for 2 or 3 days to really do the detail on this, right?
This week we start this afternoon.
Oh, bless your hearts.
And so we start this afternoon, and we'll be meeting this afternoon, tomorrow, and Thursday, and perhaps Friday afternoon if we need a little more time. But I think we'll get through most of it by Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Chairman, this is just such a dense conversation, and it's one that, had it not been for COVID and for some of the us being wrapped up in this 2020, we probably should have been having this conversation 6 months ago. It's a conversation that should take a year or more to take, and want to really highlight what Scudder and Adrian, the team, are doing by condensing this and providing it in just a few months period so that we have it ready for our 2022 budget. But it will need to be revisited every year, and it will need to continue to be refined as we put out the service. We look at the metrics for how these services are performing and need to assign or reassign what services are being funded and how they're being funded based on performance and available funding.
Okay. Any further questions? Thank you so much for this work, you guys, and for staying with it.
Thank you.
Scudder, thanks for coming.
Good to see y'all. Bye-bye.
Yeah. All right. Draft fiscal year 2022 operation expansion budgets.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Let me share my screen. If we can see my screen. Can you also see my screen?
We
Yes.
can see it as a full PowerPoint presentation,
Thank
but
you.
not as a presentation. We can see all the side things as well, which is fine.
Yes, I'm trying to. Okay. So
And just to note, I will not be giving this. This is Soumya, who is our budget manager, is giving this presentation, not me.
good morning. Hi. So these are the service expansion consideration for FY22 by jurisdiction. And I'm going to move to the next slide, which have revenue miles as well. So we have it under two scenarios, growth one scenario and growth two. Growth one is the prioritized expansion and growth two is all the expansion projects considerations for FY22. And I'm gonna move to
What
the
is
next
the
one.
difference between those two columns?
So the first one is the prioritized expansion, which is basically, yes.
Do you want me to jump in?
Yeah,
you
Adrian,
have a-
jump in.
Yeah. Right. Would you mind actually changing it to slide presentation view? So it covers the whole screen.
I am.
Two more. One more.
Okay. You want this?
Actually, one more, Sonia, all the way on the right. Click that one.
Oh, it's up. Yes.
It's the other screen. Okay.
Let me try it this way. Oh, I'm sorry about this one. It just
click that one. Nope. I broke it for you. That's okay. You can go back to the normal one. You can close it out of this.
Okay, let me do this.
Sorry, I made it complicated.
Okay. Oh, something happened. I'm gonna share it again. Something happened to my presentation. I'm sorry about that. Yes, there we go.
It happens.
Can you see my screen? I'm not sure what's happening.
Yeah, Rob is going to remote in, Soumya, to help you out.
There.
There we go. Okay. That's fine. I can go through it this way.
Okay.
All right. So this is through the Transit Development Plan, this Phase 2 Richmond Transit Vision Plan. This is kind of our compilation of things that have come up as high priority. So this is kind of the full spectrum of roughly about $10 million if we were to do all of these items. So they've been labeled 1 through 7 to correlate with that chart up there in the top right. But you'll have, and Scudder hit on a few of these, but the Midlothian Turnpike extension down Chesterfield Town Center is the number 1 down there. 4 is very similar, so both of them wouldn't be done probably. But that's the 2B extension that currently goes to Arboretum, but potentially could go further down. Sorry, it goes to Chippenham Square now, but further to Arboretum is a possibility. So some sort of expansion on Midlothian in Chesterfield County. Number 2, that is high priority, is an enhanced service on 9 Mile and Laburnum. So within the city as well as in Henrico County, and this would also increase service to the airport. So it's pretty much a big regional route. Number 3, Scudder also highlighted this one, but an extension on Route 1 going north. At this point in time, we're looking at Brook and Parham kind of as a short-term expansion scenario. But as things continue to develop, to Gary's point, once Virginia Center Commons comes on with development as well as potentially a Green Cities, we'll see a further expansion north at some point in time. And then 4, I mentioned that one already, that was the Arboretum. 5 is an increased frequency on Route 19. And the way that the miles are listed here, this would be an expansion of 15-minute frequency, but at peak times only. And as the demand continued with the 15-minute service, we would eventually, probably also in the short term, consider doing 15-minute service all day. And then we have listed out here, which would be number 6, is the Pulse right downtown. And since we have gotten grant for articulated vehicles, we know that we have a decent amount of infrastructure improvements that will have to be done pretty fast to be able to use those vehicles. So we are actually looking at more like FY23 for the articulated vehicles. So if capacity on the Pulse goes back to what it was pre-COVID, we need to do something in the short term. So we did put the dollars in there for maybe only at peak time only when people are traveling, when DCU's in session, to have 7-minute frequency considered on the Pulse corridor. And number 7, the last one, is an increased frequency on Route 91. And this is increasing it to 30 minutes all day. And there's a few other ones out there, but this is within the 10 million that kind of came as high priority. If we move to the next slide, there are kind of 2 scenarios that Sonia has gone through. So the 2 different versions are kind of a full growth. If we could do all $10 million, we can do it now. But unfortunately, we know that's probably not realistic, especially with our operator shortage at this point in time. It'll probably be more of a phased approach as we aggressively campaign to get more operators, as well as be a little bit more creative in terms of maybe we do a different mode where we do smaller vehicles that would require non-CDL. So we're trying to figure out how we can improve our resources so we can do the full expansion. But with that, of course, increased cost for more operators with it as well. So those are 2 different scenarios. If we could do short-term, kind of a lesser than expansion, and then kind of phase in the full $10 million.
Adrian, what's the relationship between number 1 and number 6?
And number 1 and number 6. So in the TDP, pre-working with the Richmond, the phase 2 vision plan, we had identified that if we have enough layover in the 2B, that we actually could go an additional 40 minutes into Chesterfield Town Center, or not all the way, but into Chesterfield County, at least the Arboretum. So there are miles already that we could do with that. And then through the phase 2, they came up with the full extension of they actually did it as a full route that was separate. So I have them both listed in there. There'll be some sort of probably combination. We actually do the full design that will maybe be the 2B extension that has additional buses added to it, or will be a separate route. But that'll go through the actual process. I have them both put in there at this point in time.
Thank you.
If I can also add, before you start, Sonia, this is, as Adrian said, these are provided to in comparison as Sonia moves forward with the baseline we presented last month. Specifically, one of the underlying assumptions is that this is going to give you the cost for implementing these, assuming we could do a full year. If we were able to put these in place, what would it cost to put them in place starting July 1, and how much money would we need? We put this presentation specifically after the last one to put it in context of when we're looking at how to put regional money and the CVTA money is coming in. These are the types of services that we would use that money to put it on if we put all $10 million. I know that we were talking about how much money we have. If we use all that and some of our surplus to put that growth scenario 2 in place, it has long-term consequences. So this really needs to be considered as what we want to do for FY22 for our budget, what kind of growth scenario we want to put in place, understanding that it needs to be considered in context with the CVTA, regional plan, and growth scenarios. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you, Julie. So let's move on to the next one. So this is where we compare the revenue miles and the total expenses and the fixed route cost per revenue mile. So the baseline is the baseline budget, which we presented last month. So the growth scenario 1, as we explained earlier, is the prioritized growth, and the growth scenario 2 is the full expansion. So the total expenses, we grew from 63.2 million to 68 million over these scenarios. And as you can see, our fixed route cost per revenue mile is reducing, or it's in a downward trending line as some of our costs remain fixed through this expansion. Anyone have any questions? Can I? Okay. So then the revenue assessment. So we are projecting 71.79 million on the growth scenarios, as the 28 million is from CVTA for the expansion, full expansion. And the base scenario, we are projecting only 63.7 million, and the CVTA money is 20 million, which we are using to fill up the reduced contributions from the local partners.
So if I can jump in here, Mr. Campbell, to your Chairman Campbell, to your point about the use of the CVTA funding, the direction we've been taking to this point is that originally we had assumed that for FY22, we would, based on original projections, have about $32 million coming in. The Baker and Associates took a more financially conservative approach and believe that that is more likely to be closer to 28 million. Originally, when we talked, when CVTA legislation came in, their idea was that we were given direction is that approximately 12 million, $10 to $12 million would be used for increased frequency and expansion of our service, and the remaining money would be used to support the existing service. This does reflect that more or less. The 10 to 12 million, when we talked about that before, one thing Sumi didn't mention that she did that I'm very proud of is that when in the past, when we've talked about expansion of service, we'll take our flat cost that includes an entire incorporation of all of our fixed costs and say that when we expanded that rate. Sumi went back and looked at the growth scenarios and she pulled out all those fixed costs. So when you're looking at these growth scenarios, they truly are reflective of the incremental costs for those expansions, which is why it costs a little bit less and we're able to do it. You'll see with less than the 12 million we originally projected, we're not incorporating those fixed costs in. And that's why when you look at that CVTA line under baseline, we included the 20 million. And when you go to the scenario 1 and scenario 2, you're seeing the 28 million. That's the full amount that Baker is projecting. And if there is more, of course, we would be able to do more with the actual money when it comes in and with the approval of the board and the region. Sorry for jumping in, Soumya.
Thank you, Julie. So now we are moving on to the expense side of it. So this is by department. So the proposed baseline was 63.2 million. So under growth scenario 1, we are on 66.1 million and full expansion would be $68 million. So this is by department. So I'm going to go in details by function so that it is more easy to understand. And this is by function. The operations is from 23.5 million. We are moving almost to 24.7 million. And maintenance, 12.3 million to 13.3 million. I'm just comparing the baseline to the full expansion rather than. If you look at this chart, I have all these scenarios laid out, the prioritized growth and the full expansion. So you can compare the total expenses are 63.2 million, and growth scenario 1 is 66.1 million, and growth scenario 2 is 68.02 million. So these are the budgeted positions and the peak vehicles with these growth scenarios. So in the base budget, we are projecting 113 peak vehicle, and that goes to 112 under growth scenario 1, and growth scenario 2 will be 131 vehicles. And the budgeted operations, these are the operators, number of operator positions we budgeted under base budget is 287. And growth scenario 1 will be 299, and growth scenario 2 will be 311. And we are not saying that we do not need any additional headcount in maintenance or administrative support staff with this proposed service expansion. So moving on to this comparison in a graph format. So as you can see, we are comparing the baseline to the growth scenarios, the two growth scenarios. And I have one more slide that compares in a different level, that is by wages and benefits, maintenance, fuels and lubricants and services, casualty and insurance, travel and training, and miscellaneous. And we have one more, it just compare it in a different level. So by salaries and wages, and then you look at pension, which is basically the benefits. Then we have allowance and healthcare, and all the other benefits. Then you have taxes and maintenance, each by function. And this is where we compare it over the years. We are comparing these scenarios for the past with the past 5-year costs. And the next steps will be, these are the next steps. We will be presenting the baseline budget to the Richmond and Chesterfield and Henrico. And we will have a draft operating and capital budget in April 2021. That would be all from me. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question, but I don't think it's probably for Tim or Julie. In terms of our projections, I mean, our demographic right now with operators, as far as those that are retirement eligible, and the pace in which we're bringing on operators, do we see that this could be a challenge? I think it was slide 6 or 7, maybe. Oh, no, there it is. Yeah, getting to 311 in that time, is that going to be a challenge?
Absolutely. I know that we have been asked to provide growth scenarios. I know that the desire of the CVTA and our regional partners is that as the CVTA money comes in, that we put it to work very quickly. It was important to me to be able to show you that we're planning for that and what it will take, and for you to understand the budget implications at this point, so that when we come back with a final budget and we try and annualize what we actually need, we take into consideration the number of vehicles we have and the number of growth that we expect to have and how much we'll actually need. But we also want to I know that our regional partners are very interested to see how are we planning on to spend the money. The actual spending of it will be our challenge. We understand that our next class is going to be larger class for our operators than we've had in quite some time. We will continue to actively recruit. Carrie showed me some wonderful information just last week that shows the number of people who are interested and who are applying to become operators increased dramatically after our marketing campaign that we put out that you all approved. We're going to keep with that push. Hopefully we don't get set back again with the new stimulus checks. While I know that sounds wrong, I very much honor that there's many people that need these stimulus checks. However, the stimulus checks also does have a direct impact on people applying for jobs here. So we might see a downturn again, but as we come out of COVID, we're going to aggressively recruit. We're going to try and get those people in as quickly as we can, train them. But as I said in the beginning of the presentation, this presentation is based on an assumption that service we begin on July 1. And we know right up front that that is not going to be an accurate assumption. But in order to compare the baseline and give you apples to apples, so that you can see what the costs are and how we're projecting it and how it fits into that regional plan, that's why we felt it was important to show you this presentation now. And when we come back with a final, we'll adjust for that. Long answer to a simple question, but unfortunately, it's a little complex on our side.
And, not that we would ever look in the near future at autonomous vehicles, but it's something. It's on the horizon.
What's interesting about autonomous vehicles, I know that gets us off track, is that we do know that the care on demand service that we have with Route Match that was mentioned earlier that we're using for paratransit on demand, the user service, the service that we have that will be with the van pool service, those are types of services that could potentially be used as pilots for autonomous out in the coverage areas where we would focus and continue to grow and have higher need on our ridership and continue to support our staff and the service, while some of those areas that were maybe less effective for us to operate could be used a different mode. I'm very interested in looking at that model. We've talked to our partners about it. I hope that next year or the year after, we'll start doing some research into it so that when the technology is reasonable to put on our rural, suburban, and city roads, that we could incorporate that as part of a larger service model without impacting our ridership core high-frequency routes.
Thank you.
All right, further questions on this? Soumya, Julie, thank you for this. Really excellent work. And Julie, I assume we'll have access to this as well.
This also, yes, this also is another one that will be put on the website and sent after the board meeting. So you'll have
This
access
is
to it as well.
really helpful.
I think what I found very helpful about this as a summary is that originally when we were looking at the expansion of service and the cost it was going to take, we were looking at a fully allocated revenue mile expansion cost. And the work that Soumya has done has shown how much we will be able to afford some of these expansions within what Scudder showed as less revenue, because we're looking at incremental costs now and not fully loaded costs. So I'm pretty excited by this work, and it does need to be kept together with what Scudder's doing and with what you'll see Adrian and Keisha are going to present in just a minute.
All right. Any further questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I had to step out the room for a minute. Julie, is there a thing where we can apply for New Start money from the from feds?
Well, New Start's money wouldn't apply to any of the projects we're doing now. If we were to go after a major capital project, a new BRT system that has a significant investment, that's where New Starts would come in, or small starts. New Starts and small starts wouldn't apply to our operational funding or expansion of local fixed routes. But we will be looking at multiple other avenues. I'm pretty excited about some opportunities that as businesses come here, and unfortunately, they will locate where we don't have transit. Fortunately, some of the ones that we've been hearing about are very open to having some kind of subsidy or contribution to the transit system to provide service to them and provide jobs and provide that connectivity. So where New Starts might not be a way for us to get additional funding, we are looking for opportunities in business partnerships where we can make that happen.
Just a thought.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot, Soumya, for doing this work and putting us out in front on this decision making. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we move on to capital needs and revenues. Keisha and Adrian.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. So Adrian will start and then I'll jump in afterwards.
All right, capital planning. This year we did something a little bit different where we actually met with all of the jurisdictions to kind of kick off our capital planning process. So we had separate meetings with the City of Richmond, Henrico County, and Chesterfield County, and looking primarily at FY22, things that were in 21, maybe moving them over, as well as things that we had for 22 and moving to 23. So came with a full list of things that we plan to have grants executed, granted we get them, in FY22. So the City of Richmond, I'll just kind of highlight some of them. Design study for a temporary transfer facility. We already talked about the shelters, so looking at doing 12 shelters in the City of Richmond. Benches, trash cans, and then some general projects that touch all jurisdictions, but again, primarily City of Richmond would be a BRT study that goes north-south, and then one for Henrico County would be an extension of the BRT further west down Broad Street. And then for both jurisdictions would be a study that would increase our current split of dedicated lanes for the poles to be greater than 50% so that we could eventually get the funds that go with it. and then looking at a dedicated lane for fixed route somewhere in our system, but most likely within the city of Richmond. And then in Chesterfield County, we're looking at doing one additional shelter, and that's at Bon Air Church. And then in Henrico County, we are looking at doing, let's see how many shelters, 4 benches and 2 additional shelters. So quite a bit that we have here from the meeting with the jurisdictions, and I'm going to pass this over to Keisha. And actually, highlight one more thing. The purpose of doing this is that so the jurisdictions now know what they expect as far as the 4% match coming each year.
This is a list of prioritized projects we anticipate applying for state support for the FY22 fiscal year. We're bringing this to you today for your general concession of the projects prior to our application submission later this month. As the projects move forward, we will bring them to you for board approval. This slide breaks down our federal, state, and local obligations. These numbers do not include our flexing of a 5307 from capital to operating for PM and for ADA services. Our proposed projects within safety, we're planning to repair the maintenance shop floors. Under state of good repair, we're planning to replace 29 fixed route buses. We have our IT annual maintenance agreements, and within maintenance, we are upgrading the bus wash and the exhaust system repair. Also under business improvements, this includes various planning studies as previously discussed by Adrian, the next BRT, develop of our adjacent church property, dedicated lane studies, also our jurisdictional amenities projects. Our sources are our federal, within our federal sources, we're utilizing funds from previous year's allocations which have rolled forward. We anticipate seeking other funding opportunities in order to spread our funds out in order to complete other projects. We're looking into 5339 discretional funds, CMAG, and RSTBG. With the state, we'll have our normal state funding. We're also seeking technical assistance programs. And with local, we're looking to spend our normal general funds and in the future, CVTA.
Okay.
Any questions or comments?
What is the neighborhood transfer center study in your prior list?
That is, right now we have prioritized 23rd as Franklin as the one that's kind of ready. But that comes from our full list of eventually looking at Southside Plaza, looking at one in the north, and looking at one at Willow Lawn. But that is the one that we're going after for FY20.
All right.
We might as well consider one at Parham and Brooks, since that's where Navy Hill went. So might as well throw one out there too. That's just snark. Never mind.
Thank you.
I'm a disgruntled Richmond resident. Okay.
So is there any consideration at this point in time, and this could come from the city, but of an additional BRT stop west of the Belt Line around Malvern?
I believe the city did a smart scale application for this consideration. So it already is being discussed and applied for.
Yeah, we should get Henrico in on that application too, since they're benefiting from it as well. The Henrico has the north side of Broad from Malvern Westwood on. So anything that's in that area, Henrico benefits directly. And a 2-jurisdiction application, it seems to me, would get a higher score on the smart scale.
Right.
All right. Any further questions here? All right. Thank you very much, Keisha and Adrian, for this. Now, where are we? Action items. Dawn Bailey.
Yes, sir. We are requesting John Zinzarella our new Chief Financial and Administrative Officer, to be added to the corporate bank resolutions for GRTC Transit System and RideFinders. So our recommendation is that the board of directors authorize Julie E. Tim, Cheryl E. Adams, John M. Zinzarella, Vaughn Teasdale, Don C. Bailey as signers on the appropriate corporate bank resolution.
All right, could I have a motion for that, please?
So moved.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded that that we add John as a signator on the bank resolution along with these other 4 persons. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, it's been done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
CEO's report. You're on mute.
You would think that after 10 months now of doing this, that we would have this all figured out, but we don't. It's still a new world for us. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, thank you. Wanted to quickly update as what's most on our mind, of course, is always COVID. This past week, we did reach the announcement of our 50th GRTC employee who tested positive for COVID, which gives GRTC a total to date of 54 cases, 4 of those being with our contractors. These cases are spread out across the entire agency. We have had 1 cluster to date, which we reported out, 2 deaths to date, and illnesses in administration, in maintenance, in operations, in management. It has been highly disruptive, and unfortunately, I hate reporting on the numbers because it makes it very impersonal. This has become very personal for us. Because of the death and because of our transparency and our openness about trying to make sure that everyone understands exactly where our position is with COVID, we are now under our 2nd investigation with DOLE, the Department of Labor and Industry, over the death of the employee. When that death did reach the news cycle and the media cycle, it is then reported to DOLE, and they do an investigation to see whether or not the death is related to the workplace environment. We'll, of course, need to wait for the investigation to complete. Our internal assessment did not find any relation to the work environment that caused this death. Doesn't change the tragedy that surrounds it or the impact on us, but we will, of course, comply with that investigation and continue with ongoing transparency. We are also under a 3rd investigation with Department of Labor and Industry that we had an employee allegation that we are not enforcing mask wearing or social distancing in the workplace. Now, we will, of course, respond to that information or that request for information by DOLE with the information that we are enforcing the rules, that we have included actions including suspensions of employees, terminations of employees, written warnings to employees, and verbal warnings to employees, as well as significant signage throughout our facility and email and Facebook and training associated with the wearing of masks, social distancing, and as we have also incorporated physical barriers between workspaces where distancing itself was not practicable. There is now barriers to protect people from being in close contact with each other. In addition, we also have management walkthroughs by all levels of senior management to review the use of masks in the work areas and to continue to give out verbal written warnings and, if necessary, suspensions or terminations, which are always our last resort, but which we will do. So we will provide all that information to DOLE as well to let them know that we are in fact enforcing mask wearing and enforcing social distancing in the workplace, and that our priority is always to keep our staff healthy and safe to the absolute best of our ability. Knowing that the vaccine is out there, we have been working very closely with the Department of Health, Virginia Department of Health, on when we can get it. We started talking with the Department of Health in December. We understand that they are significantly challenged with rules that are coming down from the federal and state on how they're allowed to distribute it and actually getting access to the distribution of that vaccine. We have been told as of late last week that our eligibility will begin across our agency on January 31st. so that all of our transit employees will become eligible for it. How they actually get it at that point is still unknown. We're working to see if we can get on-site vaccination or when the vaccines will be distributed to open areas that we can get registered and get our employees vaccinated. Until we get that vaccination done, we will continue to have service disruptions as we continue to take care of our staff by quarantining them when they have possible contact tracing or illnesses in their families, and to keep any spread from happening inside of our agency. We know that there will continue to be spread. I hate saying that. I hate saying that so affirmatively, but as cases are rising in the region, it is spreading with everyone in every industry, and we are continue to be affected by that. We also are preparing for the possible protest this week. We reported out to you during the board meeting regarding our preparations. I hate also that we have become very good at preparing, but we have. Through the BLM protest that happened earlier this year and for other service disruptions throughout the year, we do have a very good safety plan. We are working with our emergency contacts with all of our local jurisdictions. We have been in contact with them last week, and we ongoing contact with them daily. Our operators and our supervisors are highly watchful of on-street operations. We also have supervisors ready to assist on the street, and we have management on call and in the office to also be able to support to change our routes in real time, add detours, to pull any services away from areas where protests might start to interfere with our bus routes. And if necessary, if protests do become violent, to be able to pull our staff out of the service area and to shut down service, knowing that that might be disruptive to our riders. We also engage with our supervisors, with our user of service, and with our call center to expand out when people can get that service by calling our call center, and we can get user and other supervisors to find anyone who might be stranded in a safe area to get them back home or back to a safe location when or if our buses have to be recalled. So we do have a plan of action. We are watching it very, very closely, and hopefully we are incredibly over-prepared. I would rather be over-prepared and see a calm week with people giving voice to their concerns, but with no violence. We did discuss already, Tim provided the background that we did have 2 recent deaths, one from COVID and one not. I know that our staff is very affected by both of these. Anna's funeral and memorial service will be, I believe this Friday, will be sending information out to her loved ones here at GRTC. She did want to send that personal message to GRTC. Her family did send that to me this week. How much she loved working here, how much she loved the people here, how much she wanted to have a memorial service here, and we will be working to make that happen. It might not happen immediately because of COVID restrictions, but we will have a memorial here. She wanted no one to wear black. She wanted it to be a celebration of her life. She's been described as tiny but mighty, and certainly her memory here will reflect how mighty she was. We will continue with the union collective bargaining agreement negotiations this week. We have had some delays because of illnesses and weather and other cancellations through no fault of the union or management. We're looking forward to talking with them again later this week and to resume negotiations around that remaining issue that specifically deals with the union or the contract language that is management's long-standing right to set work rules, but understanding that the union does have a desire to have more voice in that process. We will be talking through that this week. Regarding our funding levels, this whole board meeting focused very much on our local and regional funding, the CVTA, and how that's going to be impacted through additional services next year and that planning process. Well, we also need to be watching our federal and state fundings and the sources that are coming in. Specifically with the federal funding, we understand that there is a new round of CARES Act money that is coming out. I know many people are very excited about that. I would caution that it is not as much for GRTC as we might see in some of the larger agencies. The federal funding for transit under this new round of money is capped at 75% of our 2018 expenses. So even though our current expenses are close to 60 or 63 million, as you've seen, in 2018, our expenses were closer to 46, 48 million. So what that means is that since we already received 32.5 million from the first round of CARES Act, we will only be eligible for another 2 to 3 million for this next round, which is not a lot of money to get us through COVID and to get us through the continuing service disruptions and expenses to take care of our staff, but we will make it work. We will also be watching the Biden administration as it takes effect tomorrow, and we'll be watching those policies to see if there are further stimulus packages to support transit, to support our staff, to support our riders, to support our region. And Mr. Chairman, members of the board, if there are no other questions, that concludes the CEO's report for January of 2021, and with the full expectation that we will get better and better this year. The rough start, but we can only go up from here. Knocking on wood, that is my position, and I'm sticking to it.
Any questions or comments to the CEO? My report is I'm grateful for the work you guys are doing. I'm proud of GRTC and really extremely proud of this organization and the work that's being done here. And thank you and all the staff whose names I can see on this screen, as well as all the folks whose names I can't see, but who I know are daily laboring to make sure that we have an effective linkage which ties this entire community of metropolitan Richmond together. So thank you all so much. We now need to go into executive session, and the man who is still the junior member of the board, I believe, has a motion.
I move that the board hold a closed meeting pursuant to section 2.2-3711A29 of the Code of Virginia to discuss the status and terms of a collective bargaining agreement, because discussion in open session would adversely affect GRTC's bargaining position.
Can I have a second, please?
Second.
It's been moved that we do this. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, all opposed? We're going into it.
Mr. Chairman, give me a moment and I'll get us moved over.
All right.
Cheryl, John, and Tim remain on the line, please, from the staff side.
We are back. You're live.
Good.
All right, thank you, Rob. Whereas the Board of Directors of GRTC has convened in closed meeting on this date pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3712 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law, now therefore be it resolved that the board hereby certifies that to the best of each member's knowledge, 1, only public matters lawfully exempt from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certifying resolution applies, and 2, only such business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the board. Witness the following vote of board members: Ben Campbell.
Aye.
George Braxton.
Aye.
Gary Armstrong.
Aye.
Eldridge Coles.
Aye.
And Ian Milliken, aye.
The motion's passed. Anybody else have anything to say for the good and welfare here? All right, well, thank you very much for this meeting. Bless you all, and we're getting a new president tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
Meeting's adjourned.
All right. Happy New Year, everybody.
Hey, y'all.
Stay safe, everybody.